Cranford, New Jersey, so local kid, went to Seton Hall University, and after that has done a number of things. You've heard Bernie's voice if you've ever traveled on AirTrain in JFK or in Newark. Of course, all of us have heard on the subway, and also Bernie's done traffic broadcasts over the years in different radio stations, and is the editor of Newsletter Today. But really, what we want to hear from her is the difference of the story she had of making a transition in a different era, in the former era, and reflect on how that might impact us for today. So without further ado, let me just hand this over to Andrew, and he will hand it over to Bernie.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is. Can you hear? Is this on? Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Welcome, everyone, and happy Transgender Awareness Week. Thank you for coming to Christ Church for Summit for our program, Speaking Your Truth, a talk with Bernie Wagenblast. Christ Church is a diverse faith community inspiring its members to explore our own spirituality, grow in faith, and serve others. We invite you to join us in person or online for our Sunday services, which is starting at 10 a.m. every Sunday. You can learn more about us by visiting our website, www.christchurchsummit.org. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Now, my name is Andrew, and I'm a member of Christ Church's LGBTQIA+ group, the Love and Faith Alliance, also known as LAFA.
On this International Pride Day, we are celebrating the LGBTQ community with the story of someone using her voice.
A bit of a preview of what we'll be seeing in a second. And we are proud to present this program to you today. LAFA is a group of LGBTQIA+ individuals and allies gathered together to foster community, provide a safe space for discussion and for outreach. In-person meetings take place here every third Sunday of the month with certain exceptions. To add your name to our mailing list or for more information about LAFA, please email us at LAFA at christchurchsummit.org. That, once again, is LAFA at christchurchsummit.org. If you need to use the restrooms, they are located right out these doors and turn left, and there's multiple restrooms right there. And a great big thank you to everyone who made this event possible, especially our media team and who is recording the event and will have it posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days. Now, let's observe a moment of silence and recognition of the upcoming Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 20th, in honor of the memory of transgender people whose lives were lost in acts of violence. Now, before our presentation by Bernie Wagenblast, our senior minister, Reverend Dr. Charles Rush, will address you, and Reverend Chuck focuses his ministry on the values that make for a spiritually rounded character. He was instrumental in leading Christ Church to intentionally reach out to LGBTQIA+ families in the 90s, helping our church become a more multicultural community. He and his wife, Kate, have 4 children and many cherished grandchildren. And now, Reverend Chuck. Oh, did he? Oh, okay. Well. Okay, so we're going to move on. We have a brief video introduction to voice actor and journalist Bernie Wagenblast. Bernie will speak, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask her questions after her presentation is concluded.
On this International Pride Day, we are celebrating the LGBTQ community with the story of someone using her voice to share who she really is. Now, you might not know the name Bernie Wagenblast, but for millions of New Yorkers and visitors to New York, her voice is very famous and familiar. Take a listen.
There is local 2, train to Flatbush Avenue, Brooklyn College. Approaching the station.
That's Wagenblast, and Wagenblast is also a transgender woman. And for a serious note to self, she writes to her 18-year-old self, someone who had not yet transitioned, and she writes from where else? The New York City Transit Museum.
Dear Bernie, you are about to graduate high school. Dear Bernie, you are about to graduate high school. The dream you've had since 5th grade of being on the radio is going to come true in less than a year. An adventure lies before you, but a secret is holding you back. Radio is your passion, but it will also distract you from that constant desire you've had from your earliest memories. The wish you had been born a girl. I know why you've kept this part of you hidden all these years. You're afraid what sharing it will mean. It seems as if there is no way you can live what you see as a normal life. Your career in broadcasting would never get off the ground, and you fear you'd be condemned to a life of loneliness. In just a few years, you will start to share who you really are, but in very limited ways. The first person you will tell will be a college girlfriend, but shortly afterward, she will break up with you, confirming your deepest fears. The next person will be the woman you marry. You feel you must tell her your secret before you ask her to spend the rest of her life with you. It's the most terrifying conversation you've ever had. You're almost sure she will break off the relationship, but after you shed many tears, she will tell you she still loves you and that you can stay together as long as this remains a secret between the two of you. I know it seems impossible from your vantage point in the mid-1970s to believe this, but the world will change, and people like you will become more visible and accepted. They will be stars on television and in films. They will be elected to office or play sports. They will also be everyday people doing everyday jobs. You will become friends with many of these people. A new word will be used to describe people like us. Transgender. I know you've often asked yourself and God why you have this burden. What purpose does it serve? It will take decades for you to get an answer to that question, but it will finally be revealed to you. You will be able to use who you are as an example to help others. In the years ahead, you will meet and talk with other transgender people. They will help you not feel so alone. They will help you better understand yourself. Listen and learn from them. Your sense of humor will also help you handle your emotions. You'll find what's funny in everyday life, and that will allow you to make yourself and others smile. You'll also see how the universe seems to have a sense of humor. For example, you'll discover that due to a typo on your birth certificate, you've always been registered as a female. You don't know it yet, but there's this thing called a podcast. Consider it a modern form of radio that will allow you to do interviews and share it worldwide. It will help your voice reach so many more people, to share your story and let others know they are not alone. One day, millions of people will know your voice.
It's moderate going through Queens. I'm Bernie Wagenblast.
It will be used in places that you can't even imagine.
There is local 3, train to Newmont Avenue. Approaching the station, please stand away from the platform edge.
It won't be until 2017 that you finally take steps to live on the outside how you've always felt on the inside. You'll see others who have transitioned. A final push will come when a friend helps you to attend a support group event as your true self. Your fear of being a laughingstock will disappear, and you'll realize you can do this. When you do transition, it will bring great happiness, but it will also cause pain. Your 4 decades-long marriage will come to an end. However, many friends, neighbors, and colleagues will support you. You'll return to your high school and tell a group that includes a former teacher and current students who you are. Believe it or not, they will applaud and congratulate you. For the first time in your life, You will be comfortable in your own
Throughout
skin.
life, you've had to deal with bullies.
Throughout life,
When hatred
you've had to
makes
deal
you
with
upset,
bullies.
Think of
When
all
hatred
you've
makes you
accomplished in
upset,
life,
think
and
of
the good
all
you are
you've
doing to
accomplished
help
in life
others.
and the good you are
Remember,
doing to help
The only
others.
person's actions
Remember,
you are responsible for
the only person's
are your
actions
own.
you are responsible for
If there is
are
one
your own.
final bit of advice that I can offer,
If there is one
it is to
final bit of
trust
advice
yourself.
that I can offer,
If you
it
are
is to
true
trust yourself.
and care for
If you are
others,
true to
you won't
yourself
go wrong.
and care for others,
You will make
you won't
mistakes
go wrong.
and have trials along
You will
the
make
way.
mistakes
But
and
they
have
will
trials
teach you.
along the way.
Never
But they will
give up
teach you.
hope.
Never
You will
give up
eventually
hope.
live that life you've always hoped
You
for.
will eventually live that
and you
life
will
you've
thrive.
always hoped for, and you will thrive.
No one seems to know.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you everyone for being around for this little talk this morning. Little did I realize when I picked out this dress this morning that I might be mistaken for one of the choir members. I want to start off with something that I talked about there. This is the first time I've ever spoken in a church. The church, for me, played a very big role in my life. I was raised primarily as a Lutheran, and as an adult, spent my life in a Lutheran church. And I, as I said in that video, asked myself, what purpose did God have for having me be transgender, to feel uncomfortable in the gender that I was assigned? And I had no idea. It just seemed like, what a cruel trick God had played on me. Why was this done? But as I said, when I finally transitioned, it became apparent to me why this had happened. You know, I could look back on my life and say, I spent 65 years or so in a gender that I was not comfortable with.
Excuse me, Bernie, I'm sorry. I don't think your microphone's on.
Oh. That better? Yes. There we go. So I had to ask myself why this was. And when I transitioned, I thought maybe there would be some local interest from some of the New York media, given that I was one of the voices on the New York City subway and many New Yorkers would know who I am. And that happened last June, not this past June, but a year ago June, during Pride Month. But I figured come July 1st, that would be the end of it, and I would go back to just living my life as I had always lived it. Well, what was surprising was that this seemed to have much more attention than just in the New York metropolitan area. Media from around the country and around the world were interested in telling my story. And the reason they seemed to be interested was not necessarily anything special about me, but because my voice was the hook for the story. This person whose voice that almost every New Yorker knows my voice. They did not necessarily know me, but they knew my voice, whether it was on the radio or from being in the New York City subway or on the air train and things of that sort. This was a story that resonated with the media and with many of the viewers, listeners, and readers who had the story. One of the things that made me so happy about that sharing of the story, not just that it raised visibility, but that it allowed younger trans people to see that story and to take courage from it. I saw notes on some of the commentary from when these articles and stories have been posted. And particularly I saw comments from young trans women. And even though it's what I call my guy voice that's heard on the subway, just them knowing that this is being performed by a trans woman gives them courage and it gives them strength. As was mentioned, this is Transgender Awareness Week. One of the things that I said when I did my coming out note to the world at the end of 2022 was I hoped that I would have an opportunity to be an educator. That to me was one of the best things that I could do. And it doesn't matter where that education comes place. It could be someplace very public, like CBS, or it can be a small book club that I've spoken to. Anytime I have an opportunity, I welcome that opportunity. Because one of the things I've come to realize, while I have enjoyed tremendous support from people I know, for those who don't know me, that's where sometimes you run into problems. If I am able to give a human face, if you will, to what being transgender is, and get beyond those stereotypes. I believe Reverend Chuck talked about that a bit in his message this morning. That's important, to see that transgender people, as I said in that video, are part of everyday life. We do all sorts of jobs. There are people who are well known, like Elliot Page and Sarah McBride, who is now the first transgender woman who is going to be in Congress. But there are people that you run into and you have no idea about them. One of the things that is unique about being a voice on transit systems is if you're transphobic and Umbrella Academy comes on, which Elliot Page is a part of, you can turn the channel and do something else. Or you don't want to watch Orange is the New Black because Laverne Cox is in that. On the other hand, it's kind of hard to get away from hearing me on the subway when you're waiting for a train. So that's one of the things that really I think is important. One of the things I should probably mention is, before we get into the Q&A, a couple of things. First of all, please do not ever feel that you have to walk on eggshells and worry how you word something or anything like that. The only way someone can offend me is if they make a conscious effort and really try hard to offend me. I do not get offended easily, so don't worry about, oh, did I word this correctly or did I say the wrong word? That is never a problem with anything. I am, again, just so thankful for this opportunity to be here at Christ Church, to speak to all of you today. For those who are going to be seeing this when the video comes out, please know that you are seen, that you are known, and that we are not alone. That is something that's very important. When Reverend Chuck was talking about the LGBTQ community being 3 or 4%, the T part of that community is only about 1%. So, given some of the events of the past few weeks, it's more important than ever for us to find community, to find support. For anyone who has someone transgender in their life, my advice is very simple. Let them know that they are loved. Let them know that they are accepted. You're going to make mistakes. Mistakes are fine. You're going to have questions. Questions are fine. You don't come out of this with all of the answers. I am still learning things about myself and about this situation that I find myself in. So there is that opportunity to learn. I hope that someday when my grandchildren are adults, it will be a world where there will be many fewer questions than there are today. But it's just wonderful again to be here. And I should probably give you one word of advice that I think applies no matter who you are or where you are. Please stand away from the platform edge. If anyone has any questions, I certainly welcome any questions that anyone may have. And always the first one is the toughest one. Break the ice.
Take the microphone to
I'll use this one here.
All right, please raise your hand. I'll take the microphone to you so we can get these online.
I'm curious, because this was a long time ago, how did you inform your parents, and what do you suggest for parents that this may be the reality for?
For me, my parents, I never had a chance to, well, I never took a chance to tell my parents. In retrospect, though, I think my parents probably suspected something. There were a lot of hints along the way, like wanting to dress up as a girl character on Halloween. That was probably a big hint. When I was about 6 years old, my best friend lived across the street, and her dad had built a fort in the backyard. And I convinced her that, why don't we change clothes? I don't even remember what she was wearing, but we switched clothes. Unfortunately, her older brother discovered us, told his parents, who in turn told my parents. My parents, I think, would have been very accepting and supportive, even given what little was known in the 1960s. Because I remember them coming to me, they weren't upset, but they told me, you can't do something like that. Again, I'm a 6-year-old at that time. Fast forward 10 years, I'm 16 years old. And I felt I needed to tell somebody. So I shared with my younger sister, who is 6 years younger than me. And I told her, I wished I had been born a girl. Please don't tell mom and dad. Well, what does a younger sister do to their older brother? Tells mom and dad. And again, my parents came to me and they said, and I remember the look in their eyes, was one of concern. It wasn't one of anger. And said, your sister tells us you wish you were a girl. I didn't want to throw my sister under the bus, so I just said, I was kidding. I didn't really mean that. That is one of the few regrets that I have, that I never had the opportunity to tell my parents. I do believe that they would have been supportive, but there were so few resources. There were really no resources that were available back then. When I was growing up, until maybe about 10 years old, I thought I was the only person in the world that felt like this, and that there was nobody else. Why was I the only person that felt this way? And it wasn't until I saw a paperback autobiography of Christine Jorgensen, who, if you don't know, was probably the first prominent American to transition in the early 1950s. And when I read that, it made me realize that I wasn't alone, and that meant so much to me.
All right.
I have a quick question. So, is that on? No. Sorry. Better? Okay, so Reverend Chuck and yourself have cited a number of statistics, okay, which of course I'm not well versed in at all and can't respond to. So I was engaged in a conversation the other night with some people on this topic of sorts, and they were citing all these statistics that I just found incredulous, except wasn't equipped to respond to. So I'm kind of curious as to how you would have responded to what they were throwing at me. It was things like and I have no idea where they're getting these information from, but they were citing clear and obvious events in California in high schools where there's like 20% of the students want to transgender, and it's being promoted by the school and the community and so on. I said, listen, I'm not aware of what's going on in California, but I just find that absolutely incredulous that it'd be more than 20% of the student population is of this mind. Of course, I can't cite anything other than to say, well, I gotta believe it's minuscule, these statistics. So I'm curious to how you would respond to a conversation of that sort.
I think one of the things I would do is to say, not to necessarily directly contradict someone, because that tends just to make us like this. But what I've said is, and I think this was part of my training as a journalist, not to be cynical, but to be skeptical. Anything you hear, have some skepticism about. And ask them to maybe look into that a little bit further from multiple sources, things of that sort. But statistics are very cold. They don't have human warmth to them. So one of the things I think I would recommend if I were a cisgender person is to say, get to know a little bit more about a trans person or a lesbian or gay or bi person, to see them as people, because that to me is really the key. If I were to just get up here and bring up charts and statistics and everything else, it would be, oh, okay, very good, thank you so much. But if you get to know someone and get to see someone as a person, that to me is what makes a difference. And relatively, a minority of people personally know someone who is trans. And I hope that by being out there, that changes hearts and minds. One of the things that I have tried to do is make it more human for people. I've tried not to just talk to groups such as this, which are supportive, but I haven't cut off friendships with people that I know have voted differently than I voted, because those are the people that I want to try to win over, if you will. Not necessarily to win them over politically or anything like that, but to get them to see trans people as human beings. It's wonderful talking to a group like this where I know that you are supportive. But what about those people who don't know someone, who don't have that kind of connection? So that's a little bit of, I think, what I would say to somebody like that.
Were there any people who played a major role in your lifetime?
There have been several. One in particular I want to point out. There was a woman by the name of Paula Grossman. She was a teacher in Bernards Township, I believe, or Basking Ridge, I forget which. And she transitioned, she was a music teacher in elementary school. And she transitioned over the summer, from when school ended in June and before it came back in September. And this was 1971, long before you were born and probably before many of the people in this room were born. And her story was getting a lot of media coverage. Well, I grew up in a time before there was an internet or anything like that, and I'm going to show you my age right now. I went to my library, I got a phone book, and I looked up her address, and I did something that you don't do too much anymore. I mailed her a letter, and I introduced myself to her and said, I am like you. We made arrangements for her to call me at a payphone. Again, another sign of my age. And I went to this payphone, I rode my bike up there about a half mile from my house, and at the appointed time in the evening, the phone rang, and it was Paula on the other end. It was the first time I had ever spoken with someone who I knew understood where I was coming from and how I was feeling. And that made such a difference to me, to be able to speak to someone like that. So of all the people that have played a role, and there have been many, I would say Paula perhaps was the one that played the biggest role in my early life, that I was able to talk to her and that I was able to hear from her. She took a great risk in talking to me because I was a minor, and with all that was going on with the school board, which by the way did not have her come back to the school, she ended up being fired because she was trans and not because she wasn't a good music teacher. One of her students was Meryl Streep, and Meryl Streep talked about what a wonderful teacher Paula was in her life. So that was, again, that person that played such a big role for me. Who's back there?
Can you share with us your feelings all those years when you couldn't come out and still you thrived. You had a successful career, right? But you couldn't live your true self. How were you feeling and how did you deal with that or even compartmentalize it to still go out there and give and thrive?
I would say my primary feeling was frustration. Not being able to do anything about this. One of the ways that I coped was trying to learn as much as I could. Those of you who are old enough and maybe remember doing term papers, there was a publication called The Reader's Guide to Periodic Literature. It came out 4 times a year. It had a green cover. And basically, it was an index of magazine articles. And every time a new one of those would come out, I would go to the Cranford Library and look it up and see if there were any articles. At the time, they were categorized under sex change. And if there was an article, I would cross my fingers and hope that the library subscribed to that particular magazine and that it was in the stacks. So that was one way I felt, was just the frustration, but trying to learn as much as I could from other people, from researchers, anything I could put my hands on, I would try to grab. The other thing was focusing on what I saw as my career in the future, which was radio. I would spend hours in my basement talking about being a nerd, reading the Star Ledger out loud to practice my voice so that one day I would be able to go on the radio and be able to read in a radio voice. Again, growing up in the 1960s, almost everybody that you heard on the radio was a man. They had deep, authoritative voices, and that was what I was trying to develop, was that deep, authoritative voice, so that I would fit in with the other people who were on the radio. I should mention, because since it comes up in play so much, the voice. For a lot of transgender women, particularly older transgender women, those who have transitioned later in life, the voice is something that they don't work, well, I shouldn't say they don't work on it, but they don't focus on it too much. And that's perfectly fine. But because my voice played such an important part in my life, whether it's as a voice actor or a radio person, it was something that to me was very important as part of my transition, that I get a more feminine sounding voice. And to do that, unfortunately, once you go through a male puberty, your vocal cords thicken, and I still sound like I'm going through puberty sometimes with my voice cracking. You have to learn how to use muscles in your throat that you never are aware of. How do you raise your larynx to make your voice sound higher pitched and lighter? How do you change the resonance? Because when I do the guy voice, there's a lot of resonance in my chest to get that booming sound. But this voice is more a head voice, and you even are moving it to the front of your mouth from the throat. So these are, it's you know, the old thing about rub your stomach and pat your head, and that can be kind of difficult. Well, add about 4 more things at the same time, and that's what you're trying to do when you're changing your voice like this. So that is something that has been a big focus for me, but it's not important for many other people, and it's not necessary when someone transitions.
So, Andrew and I actually host an LGBTQ game night at our house once a month. And we had a bit of an incident recently where a black sheep of the group, let's just say his political views are the polar opposite of the group's, basically had an argument with a transgender woman at one of the game nights. And he was called out directly for his views and basically asked directly, what do you think? And he told the truth. And it greatly upset our transgender member, and they huffed and left the event. How do you handle a situation like that? I don't know, what to do, because, there's basically people on both sides, and I don't really want to. I want to have the grace to make it an open space, but how do I keep it open and affirming without ostracizing anybody, really, is what I'm asking.
It's difficult. I think one thing that people can argue about a lot of different things, but one thing you can't argue with me about or anyone else is how they feel. Feelings are personal. You can argue statistics and points of politics and all sorts of things all day long and never come to a resolution. But you can't argue about how a person feels. So I think that would be one of the things that I would talk about, is thinking about how a person feels. Ideally, if you could reach out to that transgender woman who was offended and left, that would be wonderful, to let them know that they would be welcome, apologize for whatever happened that evening, but also maybe take aside the person that was behind that incident and explain to them that this is a safe space. We understand. Don't try to convince them that they're wrong or something along those lines, because I don't think in most cases that's successful. Think about times where you're convinced of something and somebody's trying to convince you. It's the minority of times that you're able to change their mind, at least in that one point. So that would be some of the things that I would try to do. I would just want to lead with love. We talk about love is love. And one of the things that I remember from some sermons that I had heard about how there are 3 Greek words for love. Philia, which is brotherly love, like Philadelphia. Eros, which is sexual attraction. And please, I hope I'm not making mistakes here, Reverend Chuck. Correct me if I am. And agape, which is God's love. That's what I think we're called to do, particularly in the church or in houses of worship, is to call on God's love for each other. That's what means the most.
All right, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. So I'm going to thank Bernie Wagenblast here for all the time you've given us and your lovely words. And please, an appreciation from us to you. All right, everyone, thank you for your time here, and have a great Sunday.
And if anyone still has any questions, I'm more than happy to talk with you individually.